It's the political free agents, and we're back. We have Mike on tonight, but no CG. So we did Sunday with no Mike, and tonight with no CG. So we got to get everybody back on the groove. But hopefully, Chris will be able to join us. Chris is actually, he's doing a lot with his daughter with softball right now. So hopefully, he'll be able to join us. But either way, what's going on, Mike?
What's up, brother? Crazy week this week.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. It's we were talking in the pre-show, and it's like, yeah, we're gonna have to, or at least me personally, I'm gonna have to start getting off earlier, just in preparation for the show.
Yeah, there's no shortage of things to talk about these days. So it's like trying to keep up with everything is it's one of those things you can spend all day just trying to keep up with everything.
Absolutely. You couldn't have lobbed one up better for me. But I think one of the things that I continuously get asked about is how do we actually parse information? How do we know what to believe? What sources are good sources? And that's a fair question. I think we all have been down that path of, somebody's talking and I don't know who to believe because it sounds good, right? Like these folks, and they can present information and make it sound, you know, right no matter what they're saying. But I think there's some definite tips that we can provide to help people along this path. Um, so, what are some of the ones that you use, Mike, in order to actually determine whether or not the news you are reading is one, valid, it's a good source, and then two, the information that source presented is information.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, you know me, I'm constantly trying to tap into what's going on. So I think one of the best things you can do is never rely on the same source for everything. Um, so I've got probably around 100 different people, venues, sources that I am, constantly cycling back and forth from to get information about certain things on a daily, if not, weekly basis. So never pigeonhole yourself into only listening to one or two different sources when you're trying to get information, right? There's so much information out there that you're not always going to get accurate information from everything that you listen to, but you at least want to broaden your horizon of places to go and get information from. So that's first, is I never get my information from the same source when it comes to you know when it comes to what I'm trying to find out. um, One of the other things that I when it comes to who to trust and who to listen to is, if they're not willing to call out their own side or who you perceive is their side, then you know I just can't trust them, right? So that's
Right.
great. You've got a perspective, or somebody's got a perspective about their their side of whatever argument they're making. But at the same time, you know if they're not at least willing to acknowledge that there are flaws on their own side when it comes to things that have been done in the past or things that are currently being done, then it's very hard for me to give somebody credibility when it comes to the argument that they're making about the other side. So that's another one, is you got to be willing to call out your own side, right? So another one is you got to be able to admit when you got something wrong. So if you said something, and if you're listening to somebody who said something and they find out down the road, even if it's a couple days, a week, month, or whatever, and they have it within themselves to correct themselves and correct the record, then you know that they're making a conscious effort to to give you good information if they got it wrong. Right now, sometimes what happens is that somebody will call them out on it, and then they go and correct the record, right? So there's that time. But there
Yeah.
are times, when somebody gets it wrong and they legitimately are like, hey, I got it wrong, I just want to correct the record, and that's good, right? So that lends credibility when it comes to who you're listening to. Another one is, are they willing to at least talk to somebody on the other side, right? I mean, when I
That's a
say
big one.
talk to somebody, I'm talking about having a legitimate conversation, right, with somebody who they disagree with, without resorting to like name calling, getting in their face and being like overly aggressive and loud with them. Like can that person have a conversation where they're exchanging ideas, and those ideas disagree with each other or conflict with each other, and it seems like they're actually trying to get to the end state, which is trying to find some sort of common ground. So that's another thing that I look for when I'm actually listening to somebody, when it comes to who I can trust, and whether I can actually believe in the information that they're giving me. And then the other one is obviously do my own due diligence, right? So how many times do I like, there's a lot of times where I'm listening to somebody, especially like over the internet, because I don't listen to I don't listen to mainstream news if I want real information. So, but there are so many times where I'm listening to somebody on the internet or reading something, and I'll stop in the middle of whatever it is I'm listening to or reading, and I'll go and I'll pull up another browser and I'll do some research into what it is that they were talking about, and go off into another little rabbit hole and find that information, either confirm, try and confirm or find some sort of counter argument to what they're saying, right? And then make up my own mind, and then jump back into whatever it is that they were saying, and whatever it is I was listening to, and see if the rest of it makes sense, right? So you don't have to stay you don't have to stay where you're at all the time. You can kind of jump around from places and then get back to where you were originally at, and then make up your own mind as to whether or not you believe the information that they're giving you. So that's kind of like, those are some of the basic things that I do when it comes to figuring out who to trust and what information I think is I find legitimate. So that's my way of doing it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think like you hit largely all of the points there as well. And I think to expand on one thing you were saying, you had mentioned about uh, when they're doing like interviews or having conversation. A lot of times, and I think it's very, very, very misleading when they do this, is they'll have a group of like-minded individuals and then like one person from the opposition, and that one person from the opposition is like in a corner, like jabbing, trying to stay afloat in this conversation where they're being hit with this and that and that and that. And I think one of the biggest things that I noticed, and this is one reason, and well, let me actually, before I say that, you have to pay attention to what kind of show it is you're watching too. Speaking specifically, if you're watching mainstream media, uh, and I don't know why, but Fox News somehow gets removed from the mainstream label, but they are mainstream. You can't leave the quote unquote leader out
100%.
whenever whenever you say mainstream. So uh, one thing that you can tell is like take anything. I think maybe what is it, 6 o'clock and on Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. Um, those aren't news shows; they're opinion shows, and that is basically somebody coming out giving opinion. I don't care which channel you're watching. Hannity is not out there specifically trying to inform the public. That is not what he's doing. It is a narrative. Um, Chris's favorite, I wish he was here, but Chris's favorite person to watch at night is Don Lemon.
Oh my God, I feel bad for him.
He's
Jesus.
gonna flatten my tires when he hears this.
God,
he can't
I
he
would
can't
never, I
stand
would
Don
never
Lemon.
admit that to somebody, but that's just me.
No, he can't stand Don Lemon. He hasn't liked him. in a long time, since basically he came out and was wrong about something in a very bad way. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, that's funny. It's a little inside joke with Chris. But um, Don Hannity, Don Lemon, all of these guys, like these guys are here. What's her name? Lori, not Lori, the Ingram, Laura Ingram.
Hmm.
All of those, they're here to push a specific narrative. Now they do it with the guise of the current events, news, things that are happening right now. And one thing that I always pay attention to, especially if you're watching something, is if they give a snippet of audio from somebody saying something, go find the whole thing, because what happens more often than not is they'll take a part of a clip and they'll play the part that fits what they needed to say, and then they'll chop it before something else is said. And I think that portion is can't be overstated in terms of paying attention to what you're actually consuming. Um, there was what did Trump say last week? He said something. Oh, he invoked George Floyd's name when talking about the economy. Um, what's today? Wednesday? Maybe it was last Thursday or something like that. He said George Floyd would be smiling down, and I read some of the headlines, and it was painted as Trump said George Floyd would be smiling down on the economy. It wasn't specifically that he said he would be smiling down on the economy. Trump was talking about the economy, but he did his typical Trump thing and did like a beeline to a whole complete unrelated thought. And he said, with the changes that are happening, the violence subsiding, with the riots and whatnot, George Floyd will be smiling down, something to that effect. And so it was, it's easy to be swayed by some of these articles because people don't read headlines. And I think that would be, I mean, read body, they read headlines. And I think that would be one of my primary things is don't share headlines, read the article. At least get a few paragraphs in, like read the article, but preferably read the whole thing because sometimes they'll put little pieces in there. And one of the things that I like to do, um, as well as you, Mike, is I like to break apart what I'm reading. And so if they say, something to the point of this, this department did XYZ, whatever the case may be, I like to take a beeline over there to that and, on my own and just say, all right, well, what does that department do? Like, if I don't know, what that department does, like they say the Department of Health and Human Services. Okay, what does that department actually control? If I don't know that, before reading an article that frames something that they did as right or wrong, maybe I need to go look and see what that department actually does, just so I better understand what's going on. Um, Another one is definitely multiple sources. So I use Google News because it aggregates a bunch of stuff. It's easy to get to on my phone. But the main thing that I use it for is it has a feature called full coverage. And so I can basically pull up Google News, I can hit full coverage, and I can see how five or six, depending on how big the topic is, I can see how they're all covering that specific topic. And that gives me a better, broader view of what exactly is happening from the left and from the right, and sometimes from the middle. Um, and the last thing I'll say before I want to jump into like some of the sources. That's like a broader source that I use. But some of the sources I'll use before we jump into those. I know, Mike, you have way more than I do, but um, one of the things that I pay attention to as well is responses to questions, or well, yeah, I guess responses to questions. So if somebody asks a question, Kellyanne Conway is a master at this. You ask Kellyanne a question, and now mind you, she's at the far extreme of this, but she's a master at it. You ask her a question and you say, you know, President Trump, said something derogatory about group X, insert the group, doesn't matter what. Uh, what she'll do is kind of take that question, structure it in a way to where she can pivot off of it and then go to a completely different thought. And this is why I stopped watching her altogether. I haven't watched one clip of her in probably 2 years, because it gets to be nonsensical. So let's give an example. Uh, so the poll came out recently, that where CNN said Biden was leading Trump by 14 points. So let's say if Kellyanne was being asked the question, are you guys concerned about the election? The uh, polls say that Trump is behind Biden by 14 points. Kellyanne would probably come back with something like, um, this is a CNN poll, and if you look at what happened in 2016, we had a record amazing victory that no one predicted. All the polls said this, that, and she'll go on and on and on, but she won't answer the question. In all of that, she didn't answer the question. What she did was she deflected and went to a completely different topic. And if you're not paying attention, you're taking that and you're feeling like this is what it is, and you run with it, and you start repeating the same things, but you have no substance. It's like eating milk. It's like there's no substance to that. It's just milk, no meat.
Hey, John, I always, and you're right, because these people deflect for a living. That's what they do.
They're master. Like, and
Yeah, they've mastered.
I don't
They've
say it in a
mastered.
negative way. And that's it. Like, I'm legit saying she is a professional
They
at
all are.
her job.
They
It's
all are.
crazy how
Have
good
you
she
ever watched?
is.
Have you ever watched a congressional testimony? It's nothing but hours and hours of deflection. That's all.
That's
That's all congressional testimonies are. I mean, I've said it so many times to people I talk to. I'm like, if there was one rule that I would pass, or one rule that I would have when it came to congressional testimonies, is that you would have to answer yes or no, and then you would have to expound on your answer that you gave, but you have to answer yes or no when you're asked a question. Like, you will never hear the words yes or no. Hardly
yeah,
ever. I mean, I could probably count on one hand out of all the congressional testimonies I've watched, which are a lot over the years, where I've heard somebody actually say yes or no,
right,
right?
right.
They just eat up their time,
And then
that
the
that
questions.
they know there's only so much time that somebody has to interview them on the TV, or somebody has when it comes to their questioning in Congress, and all they do is deflect for however much time they need to deflect for, and then move on to the next question because they know they're on a clock, right?
Absolutely. And they're complete clown shows anyway, because then the questions that are coming at them are more often than not, if the person being interviewed is on their side, then
Right.
they ask leading questions.
Correct.
They
Yep.
basically are asking a question with an answer embedded in it.
Correct.
And then if it's the opposition, they just go on and on and on about all this other stuff that's leading up to a contentious question where, to your point, where when I remember when you and I were discussing Kavanaugh, I was saying I don't like how sleazy he is in some of his answers. And I don't remember the word, but I'll just use sleazy for now. But he wasn't answering directly. And you're like, well, look at the way they asked that question. They asked it in a way that no matter what he says,
Right.
he's going to be raked over the coals.
Right.
Um, so those are a clown
And
show.
both sides play
Sound
that game,
bites.
right? Both
Oh
sides
yeah,
play that game. So
dude,
you'll
they
never get
live off of them.
right. So we as the public never actually get any good information, right?
Yep.
When both parties play that same game.
And
So
I think, you know what? I think one of the worst parts of that is that they're living and out. I wouldn't go as far as to say this is the only reason, but you know how I could tell Kamala Harris was running for president? She started in those congressional hearings, posing
oh yeah,
specific
yep,
questions in
yep,
a very specific way,
correct.
and I was like, she's going to run. She's going to run for president, because it was sound bites, and in order for her to boost her vision or her stature in the nation, for people to know who she was, she needed to be out there. And so she had to get sound bites. And those sound bites got played over and over
Right.
and over.
Right.
And that just boosted and that got people saying, oh, I think she would be good for president because
Right.
she got some gotchas. And she's a lawyer, so in some cases she does have some pretty good questions, but for the most part, they come out to be gotchas. But
And this is where, you know, this is, and things like this, you know, most people have kind of like an intuition about what's going on, but what we're really talking about is the theater of politics, right? Like these are the behind the curtain type things that politicians on both sides are using in order to pull that theater, or in order to manage that theater that is, you know, U.S. politics over
yep,
the rest of the population, right?
yep,
And it's to keep people uninformed, and that's the thing, is it's to keep people uninformed. So, like we were talking about at the very beginning, is like you have to really do your due diligence and find outside information to listen to. And I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not saying you automatically believe whatever it is you're listening to simply because it's outside information. But the more information that you get from from other areas, the more of that information you soak in from people that you disagree with, as well as people that you do agree with, the better off you're going to be when it comes to forming your own opinion, right? Your own opinion
absolutely.
about what's.
And I think that's the important part. Like you couldn't say that enough, Mike. Your own opinion. Like you have to get to the point to where you're not parroting somebody else. You have taken information, you have consumed it, and you have determined XYZ, whatever it may be, right? But you're not just out here saying whatever the current talking point is for,
Exactly. Yep.
for the nation. And so, I see that a lot with politics, especially when, and I'm pulling up my reader list here, but um, I see that a lot when, and I can always tell when I'm in a debate with someone and they start telling me what I already heard on Fox, because they assume because I'm arguing in the opposite direction of them, they assume that I'm not consuming conservative media if I'm arguing a position from the left, and vice versa. If I'm arguing a position from the right, they assume I'm not familiar with the talking points that they're espousing. And so, one of the things I like to do, so I don't read as much as I probably should, but I listen to a lot. Um, I like to get books that uh, don't really speak to my automatic thoughts. Whatever my knee jerk reaction is, and I always have to watch my knee jerk, and I think we all do. But right now, what I have on deck is, well, I'm currently listening to a book called "Thou Shalt Prosper: The Ten Commandments for Making Money" by Rabbi Daniel Lapin, and it's largely about capitalism, but he talks about ethical capitalism, which I just really don't think is a thing. But I wanted to
What?
listen.
You don't think
Yeah,
ethical capitalism is a thing?
no, no, because I think ethics are a human thing, and capitalism is just a system by which humans are enacting. So ethical capitalism is nothing more than people in and of themselves doing ethical things. But the system of capitalism, it can't be ethical or unethical, to be honest. But I wanted to hear more of his thoughts. And so it's a competing opinion to how I felt when I first heard about the idea of ethical capitalism. Dan Crenshaw, I do not like Dan Crenshaw. Um, he's the guy with the patch, Texas senator, congressman, something. Um,
Oh
I
yeah.
have his book. Do not like him because of a
Really?
lot of his, no, not at all.
Hmm.
Um, he grandstands way too much for me. And it's another thing, like Kamala, like he's getting sound bites and he does the same thing. The interviews I hear, he doesn't answer questions. He deflects. And so, stuff like that is, I Again, I bought his book. Don't like the guy in terms of his positions and the way he handles those things. One-on-one conversation probably will be a completely different thing. But those are some of the, books that I'm reading right now, just to, let me hear the other side.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important concept to wrap your head around when it comes to when you're listening to somebody, they're giving you their perspective, right? And their perspective isn't gonna be the same as your perspective a large amount of the time, because we all grow up different in different ways, have different life experiences that shape our opinions, right? And simply because you listen to somebody and you don't agree with them, um, it shouldn't automatically you shouldn't automatically assume that they're not saying something that is valuable to you, right?
Right.
Because their perspective, they're giving their opinion, they're forming their opinion. And I'm not talking about people that are like, there's different types of people, right? You have the people that are purposely giving you a perspective to try and slant things in one direction. And then there are genuine people who are genuinely giving you their perspective that you simply just don't agree with, right? But their perspective is based off of their life experiences, how they grew up, the things that they've gone through their entire life, right? And so people need to remember that if you find yourself not agreeing with somebody, it may just simply be because they have a different perspective on life because of the things that they've gone through and the things that they've experienced. So keep that in the back of your mind, because there's a lot of times you're going to get valuable information from those people, right? Even though you don't agree with everything that they're saying, but if you automatically tune them out simply because you don't agree with their perspective, then you're going to miss out on things that could have benefited you in the if you would have just remembered that, hey, they've lived a different life than I have, so they think a different way than I think, and we all do that.
Yep.
We all do that.
I think that's why I really like that the book "Thou Shalt Prosper," because it's one. He's a rabbi, so he's given a lot of Jewish knowledge that I just simply did not have, and do not have a lot of backstory or history on that, other than understanding what the Torah is and Christianity and those sort of things, just their practices, their mindset, and that sort of thing. I just found that fascinating. Learned a ton. Definitely learned a lot from that, and so. I definitely agree with that. But one of my favorite sources to read in terms of if I'm looking for news and I don't want to be swayed, I don't want an opinion piece. Oh, that's another big thing. If you're reading an article and it says opinion at the top, it's an opinion piece. It's just somebody spouting whatever they believe or feel they need to get across. It is what it is. It's not going to be a hard hitting, data based article. And I like numbers. I like data. I like to see more. I don't want to hear a narrative around the numbers. I want to see the numbers. I want to see the actual data. But I like reading Axios. And the reason I like Axios specifically is because what they do is they'll give you some details, some background, the big picture, and then they'll give you some links to get more information. They'll tell you things like why it matters and stuff like that. But it's largely just like, to be honest, they're not really writing articles. Like, they're not writing stories. They're just giving you a lot of information with links to other information to dig in deeper. And that sends me down a rabbit hole more often than not.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because one of the things that I look for when it comes to who I listen to is how well do they explain the concepts that they're basically that they're giving you their opinion on, right? So if somebody's talking about something market related and they give you a good solid analogy that you can actually wrap your head around to try and link how that whatever it is that they're talking about affects you, and how it works, then they're trying to educate you, right? So
Yep.
I always look for somebody who is willing to do that and is really good at doing that when it comes to how they're relaying their information to me, right? Are they good at giving you those examples and those analogies as to why this information matters, or how this subject works, or how it links to, everything that's going on right now. So because a lot of the people, mainstream people don't do that at all. They'll just give you their opinion and throw out some freaking numbers, or
Right.
throw out some information and, call it, basically pass it off as gospel. Right. So look,
That's
kind
like,
of like what's going on in the economy right now with all with these
yeah,
with
exactly where I was about to segue.
I mean, it's crazy, right? I mean, the market, the Nasdaq's up right now. They basically erased all the losses that were incurred
the
since COVID
pandemic.
happened, and but at the same time, unemployment's at like, well, they say it's at 13%, but the government just admitted that, their reporting is off, or it, could be off, because they didn't include,
Yep.
people on furlough. So I think right now
Well,
they're saying it's like 13%, but really, it could really be 16%, but
yep.
it could actually be 19%. We got all these people unemployed, millions of people unemployed, but yet the stock market is basically hitting all-time highs. So it's
Yep.
like,
And that's like perfect to what we're talking about here, right? Because what you saw was, oh my God, the unemployment rate plummeted in May. Like, man, it did this amazing thing. And man, you know what? I wish I had the chart, but it's not going to help our audio listeners anyway. But there was a chart that showed the jobs, and then it was a steep drop, right? Because we lost 40 million jobs. And then it said we gained 2.5 million, and they took from the bottom of the drop above the prior number, 2.5 million. And it made it look like we basically raised 42.5 million. That's the chart. And so if you're not paying attention to that, it looks like we erased all the job loss and everybody is back to work, and we gained 2.5 more million people employed. And it was like, this is so egregious. Like, anybody making diagrams or charts or something, they would be fired. If they presented that, they would be fired. But I don't remember which station, and it really doesn't matter, had actually put it out there, but it was just shocking to see. And people were running with that. They were like, look at the numbers. And I was like, something doesn't sound right. Like, there's no way we erased that many jobs. And so this is exactly what we're talking about. The numbers came out, people jumped on it and said, look at the boom, the economy's back. And then when you dug into the numbers, they weren't even full-time employees, the 2.5 million. A good number of them were just like part-time workers, people getting work that is, I forget what the name of it is, not seasonal. But anyway, it's basically temporary work. And it's good. People need work. They got temporary work, but those numbers are calculated differently. And they took it all, bundled it all together, and then were like, yeah, 2.5 million. And people ate it up because they heard the news, it came out. And if that stuck to what you believed and what you felt, then you ran with it and you were like, yes. Such is the news cycle. But Mike, why? I'm curious why this happened though, right? Like, in the case of everything that's happening right now, I mean, 40 million people, not the jobs, but 40 million people are out of work, 40-ish million now. And
I think it's like 30. I think it might be like 30 million now, or
okay,
it was 40 million.
so
Maybe it's,
yeah,
well,
so
30
30
million. 30
million.
million. I think 30 million are receiving unemployment benefits right now, something like that.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
The number's probably higher just because some people are probably just haven't gotten unemployment benefits yet. But
gotcha. So when we look at this is something also that people haven't understood and they still don't understand is, and we sound like we're crazy when we're telling people looking at the stock market with all these gains, and they're like, man, the economy is amazing because they're looking at the stock market. Why is the stock market where it's at when we quote unquote aren't out of a pandemic? I'll put quotes around that, but we're not out of a pandemic. 30 million people are receiving unemployment benefits. I mean, it wasn't but 2 weeks ago, people were having to kill and, basically slaughter their livestock and things that they like, pigs and stuff like that, because they didn't have anywhere for them to go, throwing away, tons and tons of, literally tons of potatoes and other vegetables and things like that because they didn't have anywhere for it to go. Like, this wasn't 2 or 3 months ago. This was just a week or two ago. And now the stock market has erased all those gains. So what is it, to help our listeners, what is it that's getting the stock market to do that with all of this that's going on?
Well, the stock market rallying right now is simply is nothing more than the Fed coming in and pumping trillions of dollars into the market. So that's all that this is. That's the reason why the market is the stock market has essentially diverged from the rest of the economy. So the Fed has come in and said that they're going to support the market by buying junk bonds, ETFs. Now you're even hearing talk of like BlackRock is coming out, is publishing stuff basically suggesting that the Fed is going to do direct equity purchases, basically buying stock. And this is something that I talked about. This is something I talked about before, like right when COVID was kicking off. And I told Jason Stapleton this too. I was like, just watch. This is gonna end with the Federal Reserve basically buying like Facebook stock. Like that's how bad things are gonna get, and that's how crazy the market is gonna get when it comes to the Fed needing to come in and support the market. So now what you're seeing is. And so basically the market knows, right? The market knows that the Fed is going to do whatever it takes to support the market, right? And so now that they know that, you're seeing the stock market go up because they've essentially eliminated risk, right? And so the market thinks that because the Federal Reserve is going to come in and just buy whenever it needs to buy and support these prices, and that they've essentially eliminated risk. They know that, so the market's going to continue to go up, even though the rest of the economy and the real economy is going to get worse. We still haven't seen the foreclosures that are coming down the pipe, the bankruptcies that are coming down the pipe, all the increase in unemployment that's going to come down the pipe because of it. We haven't gotten that second wave yet. We don't, this is still an election year. So the market's like, who knows how the market's going to react whenever the election is over, right? There's so much left to happen this year that right now people are just people kind of have tunnel vision. The markets have tunnel vision because it's going up. It's going up right now. But I think that's going to be very short-lived because I don't think the stock market can diverge from the real economy for too long, right? Like right now, you've got all these retail investors, like people. I mean, how funny? Think about this. If you listen to financial news networks, they're basically talking about how retail investors are coming in and opening up like new Robinhood accounts, and people are spending their stimulus money, investing it into the stock market, thinking that they're buying the dip. So think about it like this, right? The federal government just pumped out billions of dollars to people to gamble in the stock market, who will eventually lose that money, and that money will get transferred on those losses back to the people who are making money in the first place at the front of the market. So it's this huge like transfer of money from the poor to the rich, right? So
And the biggest, I think, because it's so relevant, it just happened this month. This is what, June 10th. So we're 10 days in. Hertz files bankruptcy. And what happens to Hertz stock?
it goes sky high. Yeah, it went up like 300% or something. It was like 60 something cents. It went up to like what, $7? What?
It was 56 cents and it went up to 553.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Dude, 56 cents.
Filing for bankruptcy. Yeah.
And it shot up to 553. And then it corrected and it came down to 252. But in that jump, if you timed it right, from 56 cents to even 56 to 252, you still made some money. But if you timed it right and you got out at 553 and you were in at 56 cents, you made some money, right? But everybody on that swing up, once it started ticking and they were like, let me jump on this train. If they didn't jump off that train, then they just lost that money.
It's just I mean, it's the stock market is like a gambling addict's worst freaking nightmare right now. I mean,
right.
Like I said, the problem is that they've essentially put a floor under the market with the Federal Reserve, and they're the only thing that they can do. This is the only trick that they have, is to print money and buy shit with it. That's it. That's how this whole system is set up, John. And the house is literally burning in front of their eyes, and that's what their solution is print money and buy shit with it, right? And everybody else is just going to be left. And this is what I was listening to the episode that I wasn't present on, and you were talking about MLK and and him and the idea of joining what he talked about, the burning building, right?
Right. So he was talking to Harry Belafonte, and I'll read this real quick just to set up where you're going with this here. So Harry Belafonte, he was an actor, activist, and this was shortly, like a week or two before he was murdered. And he asked him, kind of what's wrong with you? And he said he's come upon something that disturbs me deeply. He said we have fought hard and longed for integration, as I believe we should have, and I know we will win, but I have come to believe that we are integrating into a burning house. And he goes on from there, to say that basically America has lost its moral vision, and that as we integrate, we're walking into a place that does not understand that this nation needs to be deeply concerned with the plight of the poor and disenfranchised. And so this is kind of him, mind you, this is who everybody sees as the person who changed the world, right? Now, mind you, it was a bunch of people involved in this. He was definitely the head of the spear, the tip of the spear, but this is the person that was heading into changing the world for us to deal with integration and all of this stuff. And he realized there's something about this that needs to be addressed from a financial perspective.
Correct. Right. I mean, I think he was prescient beyond his years, because he knew that the system itself, right? Like I think he realized that the financial system itself was set up in such a way that it was burning from the inside out, and so his idea of integrating into that was almost counterproductive. Like, what's the point? What's the point in trying to get inside of a house that's already burning in the first place? Right. And so by realizing that, you can almost realize that. And this, I know me and you differ on this when it comes to race, but if he was able to identify that the system was already burning down from the inside out, you're talking about that system of included white people, included Asian. It includes everybody, right? So that system
Well,
that
if
was
you remember his
disintegrating.
words, he specifically said of the poor and disenfranchised.
Right, and that includes everybody. The poor and
Right.
disenfranchised includes everybody, right? So it's more of an economic issue than anything else, right?
And
And so
this was one thing I just noticed it in here, that Belafonte continued the conversation with him, and he was saying, it kind of took him back. And Belafonte asked him, what should we do? And his response was, become the fireman. He said, let us not stand by and let the house burn.
well, I mean, unfortunately, I think what he didn't really realize is what was causing the fire in the first place.
Yeah, and I mean, but listen to where he was though, and mind you, like I said, this was right before he passed or was
Sure,
killed.
yeah, he hadn't had
Um,
a chance to really
he
deep dive.
said, I've come upon something that
Right,
disturbs me deeply. So he was in the process
for figuring
of
out.
recognizing
Right,
what was going on, and that
right,
the economic rights were an issue that were potentially even more more of a big deal than integration specifically, or let's say a bigger deal than integration specifically, because it was, like you said, a burning house.
and look at where we are now, like 50 years later, or however many years later, like the house is still burning, and it's burning at a rapid an even faster rate right now, right? And
Yep.
the people that started the fire have already removed themselves, are in the process of removing themselves from the house, right? And chaining the doors on for the rest of us to have to stay inside,
That's a good
right?
analogy.
So, I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it's just crazy to follow this on such a constant basis and see how this is all playing out right now. I mean, and I've talked about this before. It's a time perspective issue, right? I mean, it's June 10th, and I mean, come September 10th, it's gonna be even wilder, right? It's gonna be
Yeah.
even wilder. But everybody's so caught up in like what's happening this week. Most people just aren't even willing to even think about what's going to happen 3 months from now, 4 months from now, because they're not getting the information that they need from mainstream, quote unquote, mainstream people that they need to get in order to figure out, like, okay, well, how's this going to affect me 3 6 months down the road, right? It's all about
Right.
now. It's all about what's happening now.
Right. And I think, to be honest, I think our government fails us in that, because they are just about now, right? Like we talk about this often, and I always mention this on the podcast, but we have an amazing private thread where we challenge each other, we go back and forth, we discuss topics, and this stuff we end up talking hours and hours and hours into the night. And it could be 1, 2, 3 in the morning, or 5 or 6 in the morning. One of us, pop up, or we're still up, and we're talking about what we're seeing, and we're sharing information. And I think that group is vital, because we all don't see things the same. And I think, as the Bible says, iron sharpens iron. And I think that helps us grow. But along those lines, um, I think, just from the government perspective, they have set themselves up in a way to where it works on cycles. So Obama said this, and I think it was after he won his second term. He said, that basically, whenever you get into office, the day you get in, you're fighting for reelection. Like, think about that. This is so short term. We're not thinking about how do these decisions impact 10, 20, 30 years down the line. It's so short term that when a president gets elected, the first thing they're trying to do is get reelected. And I think that is what a lot of people think of in terms of, specifically in terms of politics with our government, is they think of it in such short terms. So they think, let's stay on the economic path. They think we should do a universal basic income, right? And they're like, we got to do this because the house is on fire, right? They're not really thinking about what's the impact of that 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line. All of it will be economic modeling, those sort of things. Some of that will be wrong, some will be right. But a lot of people aren't thinking that because our government has set us up to think about these small blocks. We got to think in 4-year spurts. If we're dealing with Congress, depending on the position or whatever, 2-year spurts, whatever, we're paying attention to these individual small short-term elections. And that, I think that transfers. I think that has taught us as people, just that cycle, it has taught us to think in very short terms. A client mentioned last week or so, it was Friday, and one of the guys I work with was like, man, it's Friday, and I got Friday brain. And my client said something interesting. He said, they trained us that Fridays mean shut the brain down, right? Because in school, Monday through Friday, shut the brain down, weekend. Monday through Friday, shut the brain down, weekend. And you do that for 12 school years. And then if you go to college, however many more school years there. So we get trained. And I think the government has set us up like that. And I think it's not on accident. I think it's on purpose that they want us thinking about these short-term gains as opposed to the broader spectrum of what's coming down the pipe. And I think, to your point, Mike, I think that's what King was realizing. It's like there's something deep here that I just came upon.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the thing about short term versus long term thinking when it comes to politicians is, like you said, the day you get elected, you're worried about your reelection. Well, that tells me a couple of things, right? That tells me that they're not worried about solving today's problems. They're worried about, what do I do now so that 4 years from now, I've set myself up to get reelected. It's not about solving today's problems in a way that maybe it has negative consequences, right? Maybe you say something because it was the right thing to say now, and that somebody will use that against you later, but screw it, who cares, right? It was the right thing to say, it was the right thing to do. But that's not how they think. They're thinking strategically long term when it comes to their own personal interests versus short term, what's in our benefit, or what's in our interest, which is explaining to us how these decisions will affect us long term, right?
Exactly.
And so they keep us distracted with all this short term, day-to-day stuff that doesn't really matter when it comes to what's going to happen 6 months from now or 2 years from now, and how is this going to affect. It wasn't that long ago, John, where we used to have debates in this country about whether or not to raise the debt ceiling because,
right,
it was
right.
like, how are we going to saddle future generations with all this debt? We need to we need to be more responsible, or like, are we going to raise the debt ceiling or not? And now it's like that conversation just gone. Like they don't even, it doesn't even matter to them anymore. They just print as much money as they want, go into as much debt as they want. It doesn't even matter. So like they've essentially mortgaged off the future of probably the next 3 to 5 generations of Americans because they don't know what they're doing. And their only answer that they have is to go deeper into debt and print more money and distract you with all this day-to-day bullshit that isn't really going to affect your life long-term down the road, right? All the stuff that is going to affect your life long-term down the road that actually matters, they don't want to have a legitimate discussion about. Like I was telling you, I was joking. I wasn't really joking when I was telling you guys, like, I could solve all these fucking problems within a 4 to 8 year presidency. It wouldn't be that hard, right? If you have the right strategy, it really wouldn't be that hard. Given the technology that we have and the people that are out there that do exist, that know how to have legitimate conversations, right, and that have legitimate followings, it would not be that hard. But you would actually have to want that to happen. So either these people that are running the country are completely like just incompetent. They're either completely incompetent, in which case they shouldn't be running the country, or They know exactly what they're doing, and their goal is not to fix anything. Pick one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Pick one. Either one is not good for you and me and for everybody else.
And we had the discussion also about, and I don't know if I can even be convinced otherwise about this, but I 100% feel like uh, they do not want to see progress, right? They're not there for us, right?
They lose power when progress happens.
Yes. So if they're rendered moot and unnecessary, they no longer have that power. So why wouldn't a liberal support Trump if he's doing something that they would normally do? Like, why wouldn't you? And vice versa. If the next president, let's say if Biden does something, if Biden is doing something that is typically seen as a conservative thing, why wouldn't you? Right. And so I think largely, I completely agree with you, bro. Like, they do not want to have progress. That is completely against what they want to see happen. Because if progress is made, like you say, like that, they lose power.
The system is set up in such a way where it requires more and more concentration of power in a very evil mathematical way. It's set up. The money system is literally set up in a mathematical way to require the increase in concentration of power. And so by giving people by allowing the system to progress, or the progression that you're talking about that we want to actually happen, and by removing the power structures that currently exist through that progression, you're essentially destroying the system itself. So the system needs this concentration of power. And so because the system needs this concentration of power to grow, the people that end up sitting in these positions of power, right, they facilitate that concentration of power and that need for concentration of power. So it's like it's this crazy evil system that has been set up that organically finds these people that care about this power structure and power concentrating into fewer and fewer hands, and then what happens is those people don't allow the progression that you and I are talking about right now to happen. And so because of that, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where everything disintegrates and the house burns from the inside out, like MLK was talking about, right? And so there's just, and this is why I come off pessimistic all the time, because it's like there's no real way to fix it without essentially letting the house burn in a controlled fashion. Like, it's all about controlled burn right now. Like, this is the problem, is that if you're out there listening, thinking for whatever reason that you've got hope that the house won't burn down, you're fooling yourself. It's more about, how do we control burn it? How do we control burn the house so that we can rebuild a new house in a way where we don't all kill each other in the process.
Yeah. And it's kind of like forest fires, in that sense.
Exactly.
Where it's the forest fire destroys everything, but out of that grows something new.
Correct.
Completely unrelated and fiction based, watching Godzilla, and they were talking about the same thing, that all these big old beasts to come around, and wherever they leave destruction, it grows up beautifully after. Is that same concept, that I think there is no other way. And this is what I was saying in the chat, was that in order for you to achieve what you need to achieve, you got to burn it down, right? Like, and Congress is not going to let you, but we're going to touch on your plan at some point. I know you want to draw it out, so I don't want to preempt that conversation before giving you enough time to really dive into that. But I think it's very important that we see somebody come in. And to be honest, if I was ever to run for president, which I have really no desire to do, but we all do these thought exercises where we say, what if we were president? if I was ever to run for president, my literal campaign strategy would be I'm a one-term president. That's it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. And if you want me back for another one, cool. But I'm not going to be in office operating out of fear of not getting another 4 years. Nah, man. I'm coming in here to test some stuff up because
100%.
because we have to break this system, man. And the
Oh,
only way, in my opinion, we break this system from our side where we are right now is through education. And
yes.
that's
And
that's why we're here.
I one of these days I'm gonna show you what's been running around in my head over the last
I
7
gotta see it, brother.
one of these days, I still got to get some stuff set up. You still gotta come down to the spot and
Yeah,
work that out with me. So, but
no doubt.
one of these days, So, but yeah, man. I mean, it's just, you know, like you said, we've got our chat, we've got our thread. I highly recommend people start their own chats, their own threads, throw information that conflicts with what you know. Like, you know, I'm throwing stuff at you guys all the time, and a lot of it I know you guys are gonna disagree with a lot of it. And I know it's gonna challenge, you know, the way that you guys think, and you guys do the same thing, right? To me,
Right.
and you know, it, find those people, find those people you can have respectful conversations with about things that you disagree on, and share information and have conversations
And
and
I
and
think the
educate yourself.
important part for that to understand, um, it's not easy for non-black people to talk race and racism with black people. Like, just let's just be real. Um, but you have to be open to having those conversations. And like Mike and I went back and forth. We had a great conversation. We didn't agree on everything, but I wasn't like, man, bump this room. I'm out of here. Bump the podcast. I'm
Right,
done.
right,
You
right.
know, it wasn't like that. It was, we had a conversation. No matter how tense it gets, it's like, all right, we're going to challenge each other. And from that, we're going to hopefully learn something or enact one of us to go off and start reading some more or learn something else or whatever. It's all about having those conversations. And you can't have the conversation if you're going to shut down and cancel people just off a whim. Like what's his name? Dave Rubin,
Right.
shared a couple of his videos. And I highly disagree with a lot of the stuff that some of the guests were saying, but Dave is a liberal. And matter of fact, I meant to share another video in the thread, but he went on about what people call him and what they say about him and this sort of thing. Um, but he lets people who, in my opinion, he completely disagrees with based on what he's laid out in terms of his belief system. They are on the opposite of his belief system, but he's not in there saying, oh, no, you're wrong. No, this is right. No. He's actually having an interview where he's allowing that person to state their case and he kind of helps drive the interview. And I respect the heck out of that. I
Yep.
respect the heck out of it because you have to be able to talk to the other side. If not, then you just end up with these two warring factions, and that's exactly what they want.
And
They
that
want to
and that
have that.
and that's, you know, I saw a video online maybe a week ago. It was a it was a an African American guy. He was probably, I think, mid 30s. He was screaming at another African American guy. He was probably like in his late 40s, early 50s, and he's basically like what are we doing right now? Like, he's like, we're burning things down. The older guy's like, screw it, we need to burn this stuff down. Like, I've been dealing with this for decades now. And
Right.
he's like, and the 35-year-old guy like brings a 16-year-old kid off to the
Oh,
side.
yeah.
He's like, well, he's like, it's your responsibility. You got to do something different than what we're doing right now, because what we're doing right now isn't working. He's like, I got a 5-year-old kid. He's like, in 10 years, you're going to be doing the same thing we're doing because we're not doing anything we're doing things the wrong way right now. And
Yep.
he's basically like, it's your responsibility to figure out a different way. He's like, because
Yeah, that was a powerful video.
my 5-year-old is going to be dealing with the same things you're dealing with, the same things that I'm dealing with right now if we don't figure out a different way. And that different way is figuring out how to actually talk to each other. Right?
Yep.
How do we have actual conversations with each other, even if we disagree? Like, even if we disagree so much that we just want to rip each other apart, but we can still have a conversation with each other and still realize that we all come from different perspectives and backgrounds. Like, we all believe the way we believe for different reasons.
One of the things that killed me the most, not literally, obviously, but it was people were going to, well, they weren't going to the White House. Trump was having them go to Trump Tower. So people were going to Trump Tower to meet with Trump. And the Black community and liberals and other folks, they were trying to cancel these people because they're like, you shouldn't be talking to him and this, that. And I'm like, dude, they're there for prison reform. Like, you're there for prison reform that you want. They're representing an issue that you believe in, and you're like, nah, he can't come to the barbecue anymore. You know, Steve Harvey, you out. You know, like, and one that was the craziest was Jim Brown. Like, y'all gonna try to cancel Jim Brown. Of all the people, of all the activists in our history and the lineage of Black activists, Jim Brown goes to meet with Trump and y'all mad at Jim Brown? Like, man, come on. You have to have these conversations, bro. Like, these conversations cannot just happen behind closed doors, you know, where, you know, you can't be seen talking to the other side. If you're doing that, there's no hope. Like, just to be flat out. If we can't talk to the other side, there's no hope.
Yep.
Nobody will cross over. Nobody. If nobody is willing to cross over and have that conversation, there's no hope.
And that's when the house burns down in an uncontrolled fashion.
Exactly.
So
I see you, babe. You wrap that thing up right there. I like that.
So we definitely want to put that video in the show notes for sure. That video.
Yeah, let me find it.
I tagged you in online so you can find it and put it in there. But,
yeah. That video was very powerful. Very, very powerful.
Very powerful. So, well, John, it's just crazy out there, brother. I'm glad I've got people like you and Chris to talk to about it, as you just kind of chugging away, watching this country kind of burn in the process. But you know, these kinds of conversations, hopefully we'll figure it out. You know, I've got hope. We'll figure it out.
Man, me too. I'm an eternal optimist. I can't help but have hope. Like, I can't. Like, I have to have hope. And so, you know, I'm definitely looking forward to. I reached out actually to some of the folks that Dave Rubin had interviewed and some other folks, and they're on the opposite side of multiple topics that I'm on. And you know, but it's that I want to have those conversations because, one, I want to learn, and two, also, I like to educate. So if I feel like somebody is missing something, I like to try to share that with them, and then in hopes of also learning something from them as well. So yeah, man, we're gonna keep pressing here, man. You know, I gotta say, I think we are definitely one of the best destinations on the internet. You can find us at any podcast directory. We're on Spotify, Google, you know, Apple Podcasts. You can find us there. Also, you can find us at PFA Podcasts on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And also, you can check us out on YouTube as well. Just go to pfapodcast.com and go to the live tab, and you'll see a button that'll take you to our channel, our YouTube channel there. We do this every Wednesday, 7 p.m. and Sunday at 2 p.m. And we look forward to the next conversation. Good chat, Mike. We out.
All right, brother.